Thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to start this webinar in a minute or so, just let a couple of people join in. For those that you don't know, my name's Luke Chalmers. I head up the IT department here at CIM. And we've had a lot of questions and interest regarding our hosted solutions, especially when it comes to hosting Sage and CIM products that we offer. So today's webinar is just going to go through how that works, the product in general, and hopefully give you a little bit more information about the Azure Virtual Desktop solution and whether it's kind of the right direction for you and your business. I've got Becca with me, who's helping me out on the call, and she's going to be helping me with any questions at the end. You'll notice in the Teams window, you'll have a Q&A button. Please feel free to click on that and ask any questions that you may have during the webinar. Really appreciate the feedback, the questions, and what we'll do is we'll go through the questions at the end. So, quick agenda. Hopefully that the webinar will probably be around about 30 minutes in total, maybe a little bit less, see how we get on. But this is what we're going to quickly run through, which is firstly what Azure Virtual Desktop is, and probably the most important section, really, which is the second part, which is we find a lot of customers come to this crossroads where they're not sure whether to kind of invest into on-premise solution with having a new server or replacing their existing equipment that they currently have. And maybe going through to a hosted solution is the right path for them. So it kind of explains that dilemma and the disadvantages and advantages of the two solutions. And then if you were to have a Azure Virtual Desktop, we'll explain a little bit and go through how it works. And then what we'll then lead on to is do a demo to show you exactly how it works. We will connect up to it, show you how it would look and feel if you were to have it yourself. And then finally, we will talk about the pricing and answer any questions that you have at the end. So what is Azure Virtual Desktop? Well, Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktop, and we'll refer to it as AVD moving forward through the webinar, is a desktop and app virtualization service that runs on Microsoft Azure. It allows you to deliver a full Windows experience, including Windows 11, to users on any device. With AVD, you can provide secure remote desktop and application experiences to employees, helping to improve productivity while keeping costs in check. Now, this answer is actually delivered by Microsoft. This is what Microsoft tell you is an Azure Virtual Desktop. But what I'd like to do, because it sounds a little bit complicated, we'll just break it down a little bit. And let's just kind of interpret what exactly it is. So Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktop, AVD, is a desktop and app virtualization service that runs on Microsoft Azure. So Microsoft Azure, you may have heard of Amazon Web Services as an alternative to Microsoft Azure. And essentially, Microsoft Azure is Microsoft data center product, which delivers a wide range of services and products for cloud computing. So this ranges from storage. You can have databases, Azure Virtual Desktop being another product, obviously, that you can host on there. Their AI delivery is hosted on Microsoft Azure as well. So essentially, Microsoft Azure is the data center, Microsoft's product, and Azure Virtual Desktop is a product which sits on that. And it allows you to deliver a full Windows experience, including Windows 11, to users on any device. I'm not really quite convinced on the any device because there's numerous devices that are out there that are internet connected that you can't really connect to Windows 11 on. But in a nutshell, if you had a internet connected laptop, desktop, mobile device, such as a tablet, you can essentially connect into a Windows 11 machine, and that will give you access to all your data and your applications. And I'll go through this in a little bit more detail in the demo. You'll get a feel for exactly how that would look and how that works. With AVD, you can provide secure remote desktop and application experiences to employees, helping you improve productivity while keeping costs in check. So I'll touch on the multiple Windows-based applications on AVD. So we can provision numerous applications on the same Windows device. What I will go through a little bit is something called multi-session connections. What that basically means is that you will get delivered a Windows 11 desktop, and you can have numerous people logging into that one machine at any one time. And that allows the cost to be reduced because you're not provisioning a virtual desktop to each individual user. You are provisioning one, and then more than one user can connect into it at any one time. So you're paying for one Windows 11, and then you can spread the cost across numerous users. So this tends to be a conversation that I have with customers a lot. We have new customers that have a old server, or maybe they don't have a server at all, and they're looking to kind of make that step up or reinvest into their hardware. Obviously, there's a lot of capital investment involved in that, and that tends to be the first trigger to kind of ask the question of like, well, actually, can I have my Sage and CIM software hosted? With this webinar, I'm just going to assume in this case that there is a customer that's got Sage and one of our CIM products, Cim50, and they wish to kind of host this, which requires a server, but also can be hosted. And these are the kind of arguments for and against of whether the Azure Virtual Desktop is a good thing for their business or not. So as you can see, buying a on-premise server requires a lot of capital investment. You've got to buy the server, install it, get it configured, get someone like us to come in and set it all up and so forth. Where with the hosting, there's no upfront cost in terms of your hardware. It's fully in the cloud. We just click a few buttons and it will boot up a new hosted environment for you with a server along with a Azure Virtual Desktop environment. So you haven't got to outlay that hardware. And when you have your own hardware, that comes with additional costs as well, such as software licensing. So Windows Server will need extra licenses and that will need to be purchased. And then for those that use remote desktop who require their employees to access it from outside the office, it's likely that they would have a remote desktop server. And this again requires additional remote desktop licenses. You'll notice on the hosting side of things, there's none of that. There's no licensing costs. It's all kind of bundled in with your monthly cost in terms of the hosted solution, the Azure Virtual Desktop. Backup again, we take care of that. Microsoft look after that. That's all automatic, and we do that on a 30-day retention. Where with an on-premise solution, that's either with your IT company to kind of sort and manage, or obviously with yourself. But again, there's a cost involved in that. You've got software licenses, you've got actual hardware to purchase, whether that be removable USB drives or an actual full-blown backup solution. That is still a cost. But this last one on this particular slide is quite important when it comes to on-premise, and that is what your business continuity plan is. If your server was to stop working, die, have an issue, malware attack, those kind of things that take the server offline, what is your plan in order to get that back up online as quickly as possible? A lot of customers will come back to us and go, yes, we've got backup. And they would point at something that they have, which explains that their server is actually backed up on a particular device or a USB drive, but they've got nothing to kind of essentially restore that backup onto. That costs time and that costs money to the business to have a poor business continuity plan. With the hosting system, it's all data center resilient, and the downtime is next to minimal, if that. Scalability, what's really good about the Azure Virtual Desktop side of things is that we allocate a certain amount of resources depending on how many customers that you have, how many users you have, sorry. So with the amount of users you would have a set allocated amount of resources. And as your business grows, then we would allocate more resources to that hosted environment. So you would say, we've got another 4 users coming on board, or we've just purchased a new business. We want to kind of bring extra resource in. That's quickly scalable in terms of the hosting. We just few buttons, allocate more Azure Virtual Desktop resource, and that allows more people to actually connect into your system. Where with an on-premise solution, that actually is a little bit harder. You may need to buy extra hardware and you need to buy extra licenses. Again, that comes to capital cost. Energy, a little bit more trivial, but it is something to kind of consider. You've got power and cooling in terms of on-premise infrastructure, and that just costs money. Connectivity, if you lose your internet connection and you've got remote users coming into your on-premise solution, that obviously results in downtime for them to not being able to connect, where with a hosted solution, we've got data center level connectivity. Security, obviously with your own on-premise, you and your IT company are responsible for that, where the hosted solution is sort of backed up by Microsoft security. Typically, first layer of security is with two-factor authentication. It's embedded into your Microsoft 365 tenant, so very familiar kind of levels of security that way. And then for those of you who want to have a bit more information around on the security side of things in terms of Azure and your virtual desktop, I'm happy to kind of discuss separately about that, because the security element is huge. It's a huge topic in itself. But in a nutshell, the hosted solution, which is based on Microsoft Azure, ticks a lot of compliance boxes. So if that's something of interest, then let me know. Support is included. That's from ourselves. We will manage, look after, monitor your and update your Azure Virtual Desktop as part of your cost, where obviously if you've got an on-premise solution, that typically requires some internal or outside IT support. And then with the cost, typically it's around about 10 grand to kind of purchase, implement a new server with Sage and CIM50. It's an average, a bit of an asterisk on that cost, but that just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. So how does it work? Well, what we do in terms of to deliver an Azure Virtual Desktop solution to you is we provision first a Windows server. And on this Windows server will be potentially your data, but in this scenario, we're just going to assume that we've got the Sage and Cim50 data and a few other applications that may wish to run on that. And then what we do is we provision a Windows 11 machine to the side of that. Just to kind of reiterate, this is all in Microsoft Azure, these two machines. So we provision two machines, and this is the most basic Azure Virtual Desktop provision that we essentially do. And a lot of our customers actually have, to be fair. So this is something that we set up a lot of. We have a Windows server with our applications, and then there's a client machine there ready to kind of accept user connections into it. And this is where you start to kind of see that we have multiple users connecting into the same Windows 11 machine, which is hosted, and we can have multiple users logged into that machine at the same time. So you want to scale, you want to have new users, you want to scale this up from 3 machines all the way up to maybe 10, 15. What you'll find is that this Windows 11 machine will not be able to cope with multiple users connecting at the same time once it starts to exceed a certain number. So what we do is then we start to scale it, and this goes back to our scaling comment that I made earlier. We can provision extra Windows 11 machines, and then what happens is that you get to a situation where you can have multiple users connecting up to different machines. Just to let you know that if you find that you have 3 people logged into one machine and you've got, let's say, 2 Windows 11 machines, for example, it will automatically load balance. So when someone connects, it will then move them to the machine that's actually being used the least, giving you kind of a very consistent performance across all your resources that you've provisioned. I'll come on to how many users is recommended, etc., when we talk about the pricing. But this slide's kind of really important to understand how quickly we can scale. We can just add another Windows 11 machine and just add it in there. So what applications can you have on this environment? Well, you can have more than what's on the screen, but this is quite a common setup that we do for our customers. A lot of our customers have Sage and with Cim50 or Cim200. But they can be complemented with that with Sage Payroll, Microsoft Office, and then some Adobe products, and paperless is there as a popular add-in that a lot of our customers also have. So you can imagine when you log on to your Windows 11 desktop, you will quickly have access to these applications and more across your whole business. So to explain this a little bit better, it's probably easier to kind of show you how this works. This is I want to say a 5 or 6 minute pre-recorded demo. And this is just myself like explaining how this actually works. You're going to see two users connecting into the same machine. And hopefully this will give you a little bit more information and clarity about how this actually works. So in order to access the Azure Virtual Desktop, you will need a small piece of software on your machine. And in this case, it's called Remote Desktop. And what you will then see is you will see your login details up here. And this will give you the Azure Virtual Desktop shortcut. So what we're going to do is just going to log in. By the way, this is actually my laptop desktop here. So I'm going to double click and then I'm going to get asked for the password. So this is our test system. So nothing kind of super exciting on it, but it will have the basic applications on there for you to kind of see. So what you're going to see is that this then changes. And now what we're doing is we're logging into the Azure Virtual Desktop system. And as you can see, this is just a standard Windows 11 desktop. Okay. And what I'll show you in a minute is that you'll see other users kind of logged into it as well. So that's just our antivirus software loading up. So that's just flashing up there. And then you can see here that you've got Sage, Cim50, which we've provisioned on there, but also your Microsoft products as well. So click on Excel. And by the way, this is running on a machine in the cloud in Microsoft Azure infrastructure. So hopefully you can get a feel for how kind of quick this is actually performing. This is not my machine. This is the virtual desktop machine that I'm actually showing you here. Let's log into Sage accounts. This is some demo data on here. And then hopefully you're getting an idea of the speed and its responsiveness here. You can also run the browser in there as well, so you can access the internet. Absolutely no trouble. And then here we've got Cim50 as well. So this is Sage 50 accounts. This is some demo data. But for those of you that use Sage 50, this is just kind of how it would look and feel when you're actually using it. Also, just to kind of let you know while I'm showing you this, is that you've got a bar at the top here. So this session desktop, you've got a minimize option here. So if I minimize it, you can kind of quickly see that you're back to your own desktop. So for those that kind of want to work and bounce between the two, this is basically how you would kind of come out and then back in. What we find also is a lot of customers might have two screens so that they can use this on one screen and then their own laptop on another. But also what you can do is you can use the Azure Virtual Desktop across two screens as well. So you can have a little bit of a play around with that, whatever works best for you as you're using it. So we're in Sage. And then for those of you that use our Cim50 software, again, this is some demo data, but hopefully you'll get an idea of kind of how quick and accessible that is. And then you can access this from, as I said earlier, almost any internet connected device. So if you've got a lot of remote users, people who work from home from time to time, in and out of the office, this is how they could potentially connect up to your data. Just to let you know, on the back end of this, as you saw in the previous slide, there's a server. This is hosting, in this instance, the Sage and Cim50 data. But there is some kind of storage on there as well, which you can also use. So in this case, what I've done here is if you click on this PC, we've got a map network drive there with some test data in here. What some customers do is that they start using this, they start to see its benefits, and the server data that they've got in their office, they would then say, actually, Cim, with our current data that we've got on our server, can we move it onto this as well? And then we don't have to worry about the data being on our on-premise server. We actually now want it in the cloud, on this, accessible from any device, and then that's easy enough to do. It's all backed up. It's all protected. And that shows you just how easy that is. We've got Microsoft Excel. Let's just click on Excel. And this is licensed, by the way, through 365. So again, you can see how quick and accessible that is. Again, Word, and then Outlook is not configured on this particular profile because this particular user, the test user, doesn't have an email account. But there's no reason why you can't open up Outlook, and then you can plumb your own email address and password, and then Outlook will work as usual. So you notice that I minimized this earlier. Now, in a real life scenario, you wouldn't have two accounts connected. But what I kind of want to show you is if we just assume this is test 2, this is another user logging into the system. We've now got the same desktop. We've got the same applications, Cim50 and Sage. So if we open up Adobe, we've obviously got PDFs. But if we go to the taskbar on here, by the way, this is the same machine. And then we go into the users. You can see that we've got test 1 already logged in. So going back to the previous slide, we could have numerous users using the same software. So test 2 is logged in at the moment, but also down here, we're back to test 1. So test 1 is using this same box, working away, and in the background, test 2 user is using exactly the same Azure Virtual Desktop system, sharing that resource, saving on cost, giving consistency throughout the business in terms of the application and data. And just to stress earlier, once you kind of hit like a 6, 7, 8 kind of user limit, then what we can then do is provision another one of these machines alongside, and it will just work exactly in the same way. It just means that the performance and the resources are kind of spread across more than one Azure Virtual Desktop. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how it works and explains the previous slides a little bit in terms of how the infrastructure in the back is actually put together. And hopefully the demo kind of shows that in that situation during the demo, we had one server and one Windows 11 client, but we had 2 users connected to the same Windows 11 Azure Virtual Desktop. Now, moving on to the pricing, what the slide, in the previous slide, you would notice, or if you remember, there was 3 kind of laptops connected to one Windows 11 device. But actually, you can have more than that. So if we concentrate on the top part of the pricing here for the Sage 50 and Cim50, basically you've essentially got, in the previous slide, if we talk about one server, one Azure Virtual Desktop, we've got basic and standard. Now, basic and standard, the difference is that the standard version would have a higher spec server and a higher spec Azure Virtual Desktop, the Windows 11 client. We do find that we have the odd customer that requires like a basic solution, because there's literally just maybe the 2 people that require it with Sage and CIM, and that kind of allows them to just to have what is a most cost-effective solution. But moving on to the standard, you'll have a server which is more than capable of running Sage and CIM, along with other applications as well, and then you would get one Windows 11 desktop machine. It says 4 to 6 users, but to be honest, you can push that a little bit, but it's really important to stress that there is just one machine that essentially is accepting connections. So once you start to creep into, like, let's say 7, 8, 9, you'll start to see some performance issues on that, and that is due to the fact that the Azure Virtual Desktop, your Windows 11 client, can only take so much. There's only so much memory and processing power behind that to accommodate all those users. So the 4 to 6, 7 to 12 it's a bit of a guide. It's a kind of a recommendation. You can push that, but it's just something to be aware of. And the pricing decrease, it just really depends on how many virtual desktops that you have, not necessarily users, but the users obviously affect how many desktops that you need to have provision. And as I said, it's a recommendation. Moving below to the Sage 200 and Cim200 hosting, this is one of our the bigger product, if you want to say, with the Sage solution. It just requires a bit more server infrastructure on the back end, hence why there's an increase in cost. We have to provision things like Microsoft SQL, and there's other kind of bits and pieces in terms of the server infrastructure. So we have to ask Azure for more resources and more server infrastructure, hence the increase in cost. But the principle essentially is the same. Depending on how many users that you have, really depends on how many virtual desktops that will be provisioned. So if you've made it to the end, I'd like to thank you for that. Hopefully that kind of clarifies a little bit on how that all works. I just want to say thank you. You've got my email address at the bottom right of the slide. So if you haven't got any questions now, but have any questions later, or you want to kind of arrange potentially like a one-on-one, please feel free to reach out. It's much appreciated. I will hand back to Becca because hopefully she's got some questions to ask, but please feel free, if you've got any now, just put it in the Q&A.
Fab. So one question is, can you access this from a Mac or a tablet?
So yes, the Mac has a remote desktop application that you can download, and then where on the demo that was from a Windows laptop, which was mine during the demo, you can download a Mac equivalent remote desktop application, which will be essentially exactly the same. In regards to the tablet, for those that potentially might be on the call that use shop floor data capture, we have a lot of customers that have tablets out in the factory. They remote into this to access their shop floor data capture software, and then they can scan and barcode and the like. But in a nutshell, the answer is yes.
And got another one. I noticed that with the second user that you logged into, there was no Office applications on their desktop. Is that right?
Yeah, so with the second user, that is essentially their desktop. So in that particular instance, no shortcuts have been created for that particular user. But bear in mind that although I talked about consistency in terms of the applications are still there, but the users can configure their desktop, their background, wallpaper, their shortcuts, their start menu, however they see fit. And that will be theirs and theirs only. And that, although it's on the same machine as other users, it will only affect them. So in that instance, there was just no shortcuts for the Microsoft Office applications, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Office wasn't on there. It was.
And then the final one we've got so far is, how secure is it?
So touching on the previous slide in terms of the comparison between the on-premise and the hosting, the security involved, it integrates with your Microsoft 365 solution. So when you log on to Microsoft 365, you use your email address and your password, and then hopefully that you're using two-factor authentication as well. So when you go to log in from a machine, it will ask you for your username and password. It will ask you for two-factor, and then that will actually get you into the system. In terms of security, regarding the data center level, as I mentioned earlier, Azure have got numerous compliance documentation. And for those that actually have to comply with a lot of like ISO compliance or cyber essentials is another one. It certainly ticks the boxes a lot easier than if it was on-prem.
I don't think we've got any other questions today.
Cool. Okay. Well, again, thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. And as I said, you've got my email. So if you wish to get in touch, then please do.